Amara pressed her back against the cold wooden wall of the ship. The smell down here was terrible. People were crying softly in the darkness. She could hear the ocean waves hitting the sides of the ship over and over again. 3 weeks had passed since they took her from her village. 3 weeks since she last saw the sun properly. Her wrists hurt from the heavy chains. Her stomach felt empty and twisted with pain. Many people around her were very sick. The ship was called Esperanza. Amara heard the sailors say this name sometimes when they came down with water and small pieces of bread. She did not know what the word meant, but she remembered it outside. The storm was getting worse. The ship moved up and down like a wild animal. Sometimes it felt like they were flying through the air. Then they would crash down hard into the water. People were getting thrown from side to side. Some were too weak to hold on properly. Amara closed her eyes and thought about home. She remembered her small house with the bright red door. She thought about the market where she sold vegetables every morning. The children would run between the stalls, laughing and playing games. Her neighbor would wave and ask about her crops. Those days felt like a dream now, a beautiful dream that was far, far away. Thunder crashed above them. The whole ship shook like it might break apart. Water started coming in through small cracks in the walls. People started screaming. Even the ones who had been quiet for days found their voices again. Then the ship turned hard to one side, really hard. Amara felt her body lift off the floor. She grabbed onto anything she could find. Other people were sliding across the wet wooden floor. The chains made terrible scraping sounds. Something was wrong up there. She could hear the sailors shouting at each other. Their voices sounded scared too. This made Amara even more frightened. If the people who knew about ships were scared, what did that mean for everyone else? The ship kept turning and turning. It felt like they might flip completely over. More water was coming in now. The floor was getting slippery. Some people could not hold on anymore and slid into the growing puddle of cold sea water. Then came a sound she would never forget, a loud cracking noise, like when a big tree falls in the forest. But this was much louder, much scarier. The wooden boards above their heads started to split apart. Light came through the cracks, not sunlight, but the gray light of the storm. Rain started falling on them. At first, Amara was happy to feel the clean water on her face. But then she realized what this meant. The ship was breaking. The wooden cover that kept them locked down here was coming loose. With each big wave, it moved a little more. The metal pieces that held it down were bending and twisting. Some were breaking completely. A huge wave hit the ship, bigger than any before. The cover flew off completely. Suddenly, Amara could see the dark storm clouds above. Rain fell hard on everyone. But there was something else too. Fear like she had never felt before. The opening above them looked like a hungry mouth. The storm seemed to be reaching down, trying to grab them. The ship turned again. And this time it turned so far that Amara thought they would never come back up. That is when it happened. The ship hit something in the water. Maybe another piece of wood from a different broken ship. Maybe just a really big wave. But whatever it was, it made a hole in the side of the ship, right near where Amara was sitting. Water rushed in like a waterfall. But it was not just water. The force was so strong that it grabbed people and pulled them toward the hole. Amara tried to hold on, but her chains were slipping. Her hands were too weak. She felt herself being pulled toward the opening. The cold water was all around her now. She could not breathe properly. Everything was happening so fast. Other people were being pulled too, but she could not help them. She could barely help herself. The last thing she saw inside the ship was a woman reaching out her hand, trying to grab Amara and pull her back. But it was too late. The water was too strong. The hole was too big. Amara went through the opening and into the angry ocean. The water was so cold it felt like knives on her skin. She went down, 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 into the dark water. The chains on her wrists and legs were pulling her deeper. She kicked as hard as she could, but the metal was too heavy. She thought this was the end. She thought about her village one more time, about the red door of her house, about the children playing in the market. She wanted to say goodbye, but there was only water in her mouth. Then something amazing happened. As she hit the side of the ship while falling, the old chains broke. The metal was old and weak from the salt water. It could not hold together anymore. Suddenly, her arms and legs were free. She kicked toward the light above. Her lungs were burning. She needed air right now. She swam harder than she had ever swum before. Finally, her head came up above the water. She could breathe again. But when she looked around, she saw something that made her heart sink. The ship was already far away, moving fast through the storm, getting smaller and smaller. Soon it would be gone completely. She was alone in the middle of the ocean. The waves were huge. The wind was strong. The rain was hitting her face so hard she could barely see. Lightning lit up the dark sky for just a second. Then everything was black again. Amara tried to swim toward where she thought the ship had gone, but it was impossible. The waves kept pushing her in different directions. She would swim one way. Then a big wave would carry her somewhere else. She was getting more and more tired. That is when she saw it floating near her, a piece of wood. From the ship, it was long and thick, like part of a fence. She grabbed onto it with both hands. It was enough to keep her head above water. She held on tight as the storm continued around her. The wood was rough and gave her small cuts on her hands, but she did not let go. It was the only thing keeping her alive. Hours passed. The storm slowly got quieter. The waves got smaller. When the sun finally came up, Amara could see clearly for the first time. There was water everywhere she looked. No land, no ships, no people. Just her, floating on a piece of wood in the endless ocean. She was free from the chains. But now she faced something else that might be just as dangerous. She was completely alone, far from any land, with no food or fresh water. The sun was starting to get hot, and she knew it would only get hotter. But Amara was still alive. After everything that had happened, she was still breathing, still floating, still hoping. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was not ready to give up, not yet. The first day floating on the piece of wood felt like the longest day of Amara's life. The sun came up bright and hot. It felt good at first after being cold and wet all night, but soon it became too much. Her skin started to burn. Her lips began to crack. She tried to use her hands to splash water on her face and arms. But the salt water made everything worse. It stung the small cuts on her hands. It made her skin feel tight and painful. She quickly learned not to do this anymore. The worst part was being thirsty. So much water all around her, but she could not drink any of it. She knew salt water would make her sick. She had heard people in her village talk about this. Sailors who drank ocean water went crazy and died by the second day. Amara started to see things that were not there. She thought she saw birds flying toward her, but when she looked more carefully, there was nothing. She thought she heard people calling her name, but it was just the sound of waves. Her piece of wood was strong, but it was not comfortable. The rough edges hurt her arms and chest where she held on. She tried to find better ways to float with it, but there was no perfect position. Everything hurt after a while. On the third day, she felt very weak. Her head felt light and strange. Sometimes she forgot where she was. She would close her eyes and think she was back home, sleeping in her own bed. Then a wave would hit her face and she would remember the terrible truth. She started talking to people who were not there. She had long conversations with her mother, who had died many years ago. Her mother seemed so real. She could almost see her face in the clouds above. "Mama, I'm so tired," Amara said out loud. Her voice was rough and hard to hear. In her mind, her mother smiled and said, "You are strong, my daughter, stronger than you know. Do not give up now." These conversations helped her feel less alone. Even if they were not real, they gave her hope. They reminded her of who she was before all this happened. She was not just someone floating in the ocean. She was a daughter. She had been a farmer. She had friends who cared about her. On the fourth day, something changed. Amara woke up to find that the water around her looked different. It was not as deep blue as before. It looked more green and clear. She could almost see the bottom dot at first. She thought this was another dream, but then she felt something under her feet. Sand. She was in shallow water now. Somewhere ahead of her, there had to be land. She used her last bit of strength to kick her legs and push the piece of wood forward. The water kept getting more shallow. Soon she could stand up. Even though the water was still up to her chest, she looked ahead and saw something beautiful. A small island with white sand and green trees. It was not very big, but it was land, real land. She almost cried with happiness. Amara left her piece of wood floating in the water and walked toward the bee. Each step was hard. Her legs felt like they might not work anymore. But she kept going. When her feet finally touched the dry sand, she fell down on her knees. The sand felt so good under her hands, warm and soft and solid. She had forgotten what it felt like to touch something that did not move with the waves. She pressed her face against the sand and just lay there for a long time. But she was still very thirsty. She needed to find fresh water or she would die on this beach. She looked around the small island. It had palm trees and some green plants. She did not recognize. Maybe there was water somewhere. She crawled on her hands and knees toward the trees. Her body was too weak to walk properly. In the shade of the palm trees, she felt a little better. The sun was not burning her skin anymore. Then she heard it, the sound of water dripping. She followed the sound and found something wonderful. A small spring coming out of some rocks, fresh, clean water. Amara drank and drank until her stomach hurt. The water tasted better than anything she had ever had before. It was cool and sweet. She felt it bringing life back to her body. She splashed it on her face and arms. For the first time in days, she felt hope. After drinking, she felt very tired. She found a soft spot under a big palm tree and lay down. The ground did not move like the ocean. The tree gave her shade from the hot sun. She fell asleep immediately. She slept for a very long time. When she woke up, it was getting dark. She felt much better, but also very hungry. She had not eaten anything real in many days. She needed to find food. Amara walked around the small island as the sun went down. It was not very big. She could walk all the way around it in about an hour. There were no other people here. No houses or boats. She was completely alone. But the island had things she could use. There were coconuts in the palm trees. Some of them had fallen on the ground. She picked one up and tried to open it. This was harder than she thought. The outside was very tough. She found a sharp rock and used it to make holes in the coconut. Inside was sweet milk and white meat that tasted good. It was not much food, but it was something. Her stomach felt a little better. As night came, Amara realized she needed to make a place to sleep. She could not just lie on the sand every night. She gathered palm leaves and made a simple bed under the biggest tree. It was not comfortable like her old bed at home, but it was better than sleeping on the hard ground. That night, she looked up at the stars. They were brighter than she had ever seen them before. In her village, there were always fires and lamps that made the sky less clear. Here, with no other lights anywhere, the stars seemed close enough to touch. She made a promise to herself. She would stay alive. She would learn how to live on this island. Maybe someday, someone would find her. Maybe she would find a way to leave. But until then, she would not give up. The next morning, Amara started learning how to survive. She found more coconuts and learned easier ways to open them. She discovered that some of the green plants had fruits she could eat. She found small crabs near the water that she could catch with her hands. She also learned to make fire. She rubbed dry sticks together the way her grandfather had taught her when she was a child. It took many tries, but finally she got a small flame. Fire meant she could cook the crabs. It also meant she could make smoke signals if she ever saw a ship. Days turned into weeks. Amara's body got stronger. Her skin got darker from the sun. But she learned to stay in the shade during the hottest parts of the day. She made better tools from stones and pieces of wood that washed up on the beach. She built a real shelter using palm leaves and branches. It kept her dry when it rained and cool when the sun was too hot. She made a place to collect rainwater so she would always have something to drink. But even as her body got stronger, her heart felt heavy sometimes. She missed talking to people. She missed hearing laughter. She missed the sounds of her village. In the morning, when everyone was starting their day at night, she would sit by her fire and tell stories to herself. She would remember all the stories her grandmother used to tell. She would sing songs from home. Even though there was no one to hear them, this helped her remember who she was every day. She climbed to the highest point on the island and looked for ships. She kept her fire ready to make smoke signals. She never saw anything except water and sky, but she never stopped looking. Hope was the thing that kept her alive. 6 months had passed since Amara first stepped onto the island. She had learned to live here, but she never stopped hoping that someone would find her every morning. She climbed up to her lookout spot and searched the horizon for ships. This morning started like all the others. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in soft colors. Amara walked to her usual spot on the hill and looked out at the endless water. She was about to turn away when she saw something different, a dark spot on the water, far away, but definitely there. At first, she thought it might be a whale or a large piece of floating wood, but as she watched, it seemed to be moving in a straight line. Ships moved like that. Whales did not. Her heart started beating fast. She ran down to her fire and threw green leaves on it to make thick smoke. She had practiced this many times, but always alone. Now it really mattered. The smoke went up high into the still morning air. She ran back to her lookout spot. The dark shape was definitely getting bigger. It was coming toward her island. After all these months of waiting and hoping, someone was finally coming. But then, a terrible thought came to her mind. What if these were bad people? What if they would hurt her or take her away to another terrible place? She had escaped from one nightmare. Maybe she was about to enter another one. The ship was close enough now that she could see it clearly. It was smaller than the big ship she had fallen from. This one looked different. Not like the ships that carried people like cargo. This looked more like the fishing boats she remembered from the river near her village. 3 men were on the boat. She could see them pointing at her smoke signal and talking to each other. One of them was looking at her island through a small telescope. She hid behind some rocks so they could not see her yet. The boat had problems. She could see that one side was damaged. The men were working hard to keep it moving toward the island. Maybe they needed help as much as she did. Maybe they were not here to hurt her. As the boat got closer to the beach, Amara made a decision. She would hide and watch them first. If they seemed dangerous, she would stay hidden. If they seemed kind, maybe she would show herself. The first man to step onto the beach was tall with light skin and brown hair. He looked tired and worried. His clothes were dirty and torn. This was not what she expected people on ships to look like. He looked more like someone who needed help. The second man was much older with gray hair and a beard. He walked slowly, like his legs hurt. The third was young, maybe still a boy. He looked scared and stayed close to the older man. The tall man started walking around the beach. He was looking at her footprints in the sand. He followed them to where she got water from the spring. Then he saw her shelter and the place where she made fires. "Someone lives here," he said in a language she did not understand completely. But his voice sounded gentle, not angry or mean. Amara watched from behind the trees as the man examined her simple home. He was very careful not to touch anything. He seemed respectful, like he did not want to disturb her things. This made her feel a little less afraid. The 3 men talked together for a while. The tall one seemed to be the leader. He was trying to decide what to do. The old man sat down on a rock and held his head in his hands. He looked very sick. Then the young one said something that made them all look around more carefully. He had found some of her tools and the remains of her last meal. They knew for sure now that someone was living here. "Hello," the tall man called out. "We do not want to hurt you. We need help. Our boat is broken." Amara understood some of these words. She had learned a little bit of this language on the big ship by listening to the sailors talk. The man's voice sounded honest and kind, but she was still scared. She stayed hidden and watched them more. The men made their own fire on the beach. They had food with them and shared it with each other. The tall man was very careful to give the old man and the boy the best pieces. This told Amara something important about him. He cared about other people. As the day went on, she watched them work on their boat. The tall man knew a lot about fixing things. He was smart and patient. When the young one made mistakes, he did not get angry. He just showed him the right way to do it. The old man was definitely sick. He had a fever and could not help with the work. The tall man took care of him like he was family. He gave him water and made sure he stayed in the shade. He was gentle and kind. By evening, Amara started to believe these might be good people, but she was still too scared to show herself. What if she was wrong? What if they were just pretending to be nice? That night, the three men slept on the beach near their fire. Amara could hear them talking quietly. The tall man was worried about the old one. The young one was scared about being stuck on the island. But none of them said anything mean about finding signs that someone lived there. The next morning, something happened that changed everything. The old man became much sicker. He was hot with fever and could barely wake up. The tall man was very worried. He did not know what to do. Amara knew what to do. She had learned about healing plants from her grandmother. On this island, she had found several plants that were good for fevers. She had used them herself when she first got sick from drinking too much salt water. She watched the tall man try to help his friend, but he did not know about the right plants. The old man was getting worse. If someone did not help him soon, he might die. Amara made a very brave decision. She would show herself and try to help. If these men hurt her, at least she would have tried to save a life. Her grandmother always said that helping sick people was more important than being safe. She gathered the plants she needed and prepared them the way her grandmother had taught her. Then she took a deep breath and walked out from behind the trees. The young one saw her first. His eyes got very wide and he pointed at her. The tall man turned around and saw her too. For a moment, nobody moved or said anything. Amara held up the plants in her hands. She pointed to the sick old man and then to the plants. She was trying to show them that she wanted to help. The tall man understood. He looked at her carefully, not with fear or anger, but with surprise and hope. He could see that she was trying to help his friend. "You want to help him?" he asked slowly, using simple words. Amara nodded. She walked slowly toward the sick man, moving carefully so she would not scare them. The tall man watched her but did not try to stop her. She knelt down next to the old man and felt his forehead. He was very hot. She mixed the plants with some water and made a drink for him. Then she looked at the tall man and made gestures to show that the old man should drink it. The tall man thought for a moment. He was deciding whether to trust her. Finally, he nodded. He helped lift the old man's head so he could drink the plant medicine. For the rest of that day, Amara stayed near the sick man. She gave him the plant medicine every few hours. She showed the tall man how to keep him cool with wet cloths. She did everything her grandmother had taught her about helping people with fevers. The tall man watched everything she did. He was learning from her. Sometimes he asked questions using gestures and simple words. Amara tried her best to answer. By evening, the old man was feeling a little better. His fever was going down. He was able to drink water without help. The medicine was working. The tall man looked at Amara with something new in his eyes: respect, gratitude. He realized that she had probably saved his friend's life. "Thank you," he said. And she understood these words. For the first time in 6 months, Amara smiled at another person. For the first time since falling from that terrible ship, she felt like maybe things could get better. That night, the four of them sat around the fire together. They could not talk much because they spoke different languages, but they did not need many words. They shared food. They took turns watching over the old man. They were like a small family, taking care of each other. Amara realized something important. She was not alone anymore. These people needed her help, and she needed theirs. Maybe together, they could all find a way to leave this island and start new lives somewhere safe.